Hi, everyone. Today we will learn English through the inspiring and historical story of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan. Through this story, you will not only discover important events from his life, but you will also improve your English listening skills, pronunciation, and vocabulary in an easy and natural way. This story explains his struggles, leadership, and determination that changed the history of the subcontinent. So please stay with us till the end, like this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more English learning stories. Now let's begin our journey and start the story. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, born Muhammad Ali Jinnah Bai on 25 December 1876, was a barrister, politician, and the founder of Pakistan. He later became the leader of the All India Muslim League from 1913 until the creation of Pakistan on 14 August 1947. After independence, he served as Pakistan's first governor-general until his death in 1948. In Pakistan, people lovingly call him Quaid-e-Azam, which means great leader. Jinnah was born at Wazir Mansion in Karachi. He went to London and trained as a barrister at Lincoln's Inn. After returning to India, he enrolled at the Bombay High Court and began a successful legal career. Over time, his interest shifted from law to national politics, and politics eventually became his life's mission. In the early part of his political career, Jinnah rose to prominence in the Indian National Congress. During these years, he strongly supported Hindu-Muslim unity and played a key role in shaping the Lucknow Pact of 1916 between the Congress and the All India Muslim League. He was also an important leader in the All India Home Rule League, and leader presented a 14-point constitutional reform plan to protect Muslim political rights. In 1920, Jinnah resigned from the Congress when it adopted the policy of satyagraha. He believed this movement would lead to political disorder. After this decision, he fully committed himself to the All India Muslim League and worked tirelessly to protect Muslims from marginalization in a Hindu-majority system. In 1940, under Jinnah's leadership, the Muslim League passed the historic Lahore Resolution, demanding a separate homeland for Muslims. During the Second World War, the League grew stronger while Congress leaders were imprisoned. In the elections held after the war, the Muslim League won most of the seats reserved for Muslims. Eventually, the Congress and the Muslim League failed to agree on a power-sharing formula for a united India. As a result, it was decided that British India would be divided, leading to the creation of Hindu-majority India and a separate Muslim state, Pakistan. As Pakistan's first governor-general, Jinnah worked to build the new nation. He focused on establishing government institutions and personally supervised relief efforts for millions of Muslim migrants who moved to Pakistan after independence. Muhammad Ali Jinnah died in September 1948 at the age of 71, just over a year after Pakistan gained independence. He left behind a powerful and respected legacy. Many universities and public buildings in Pakistan are named after him. He's honored as Quaid-e-Azam and Baba-e-Qaum, the father of the nation, and his birthday is observed as a national holiday. According to his biographer, Stanley Walpert, Jinnah remains Pakistan's greatest leader. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was born as Muhammad Ali Jinnah Bai, most likely on 25 December 1876. He was born in a rented apartment on the second floor of Wazir Mansion near Karachi. At that time, this area was part of the Bombay Presidency of British India. His father was Jinnah Bai Punja, and his mother was Mithi Bai Jinnah. Jinnah's family background came from the Kathiawar Peninsula in the princely state of Gondal, which is now in Gujarat, India. His paternal grandfather lived there. Jinnah himself followed the Nizari Ismaili branch of Shia Islam in his early life, though later he followed Twelver Shia beliefs. After his death, some relatives and witnesses claimed that he had later converted to Sunni Islam. Jinnah belonged to a wealthy merchant family. His father was a successful merchant and came from a family of textile weavers from the village of Panali. His mother belonged to the nearby village of Dafa. The family moved to Karachi in 1975, shortly after their marriage. At that time, Karachi was growing rapidly because the opening of the Suez Canal had made it much closer to Europe for trade. Jinnah was the eldest child in the family. He had 3 brothers and 4 sisters, including his younger sister Fatima Jinnah and his younger brother Ahmed Ali Jinnah. He was not fluent in Gujarati, his mother tongue, nor in Urdu, but he was very fluent in English. Except for Fatima Jinnah, little is known about the later lives of his siblings. As a child, Jinnah spent some time in Bombay with his aunt. He may have attended the Gokul Das Tej primary school and later studied at the Cathedral and John Cannon School. After returning to Karachi, he studied at Sindh Madrasatul Islam and the Christian missionary Caesar High School. He later completed his matriculation from Bombay University. Over the years, many stories were told about Jinnah's childhood. Some said he spent his free time listening to court proceedings, while others claimed he studied under streetlights due to lack of proper lighting. His official biographer, Hector Bolitho, interviewed people who knew him as a boy and recorded that young Jinnah encouraged other children to keep themselves clean, avoid playing marbles in the dust, and instead play cricket. Now let me move to his education in England. In 1892, a business associate of his father, Sir Frederick Lee Croft, offered young Jinnah an apprenticeship in London with Graham's Shipping and Trading Company. Despite his mother's opposition, Jinnah accepted the offer. Before leaving, her mother arranged his marriage to his cousin, Emmy Bai Jinnah. Sadly, both her mother and his first wife died while he was in England. Although the apprenticeship was a valuable opportunity, another reason for sending Jinnah abroad was a legal case against his father, which threatened the family's property. In 1893, the family moved to Bombay. Soon after arriving in London, Jinnah made a bold decision. He left the business apprenticeship and chose to study law instead, which greatly angered his father. He joined Lincoln's Inn to become a barrister. Jinnah later explained that he chose Lincoln's Inn because it honored great lawgivers, including Muhammad. His biographer, Stanley Walpert, noted that while no such inscription existed at the entrance, a mural inside depicted famous lawgivers. Jinnah followed the traditional legal training system, learning directly under experienced barristers while studying law books. During this time, he shortened his name to Muhammad Ali Jinnah. While studying in England, he was deeply influenced by 19th-century British liberal thinkers like Bentham, Mill, Spencer, and Comte. He developed strong ideas about democracy, constitutionalism, and progressive politics. He greatly admired leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji and Sir Fayraz Mehta. Jinnah even listened to Naoroji's historic first speech in the British Parliament from the Visitors' Gallery. England also shaped Jinnah's personal style. He adopted Western clothing and became known for his elegant appearance. He owned more than 200 suits, wore perfectly starched shirts, and never repeated the same silk tie. Even during his final days, he insisted on dressing formally. In later years, he was often seen wearing the Karakul hat, which became famous as the Jinnah cap. For a short time, he explored a career in theater with a Shakespearean company, but soon gave it up after receiving a strict letter from his father. In 1895, at just 19 years of age, he became the youngest British Indian to be called to the bar in England. Soon after, he returned to Karachi briefly, before settling in Bombay to begin his professional life. At the age of 20, Jinnah began his legal practice in Bombay. At that time, he was the only Muslim barrister in the city. English became his main language and remained so throughout his life. The first few years of his practice, from 1997 to 1900, were difficult and brought him very little work. His fortunes began to change when the acting Advocate General of Bombay, John Molesworth Macpherson, invited Jinnah to work from his chambers. In 1908, when a Bombay Presidency magistrate, P.H. Dastoor, temporarily left his post, Jinnah secured the interim position. After 6 months, he was offered a permanent job with a monthly salary of 1,500 rupees. Jinnah politely refused, saying he intended to earn 1,500 rupees a day. At the time, this sounded unrealistic, but he eventually achieved it. Later in life, as Governor General of Pakistan, he refused a large salary and fixed his pay at only 1 rupee a month. Jinnah gained wide recognition as a lawyer through his role in. Many of Jinnah's colleagues remembered him as a confident and fearless advocate. One recalled how Jinnah firmly replied to a judge who tried to put him down, reminding the court that respect worked both ways. Another described him as a natural-born pleader, a clear thinker who chose his words carefully and delivered his arguments slowly and powerfully. Beyond the courtroom, Jinnah also supported workers' rights. He was an active trade unionist and strongly believed in fair wages and working conditions. In 1925, he was elected president of the All India Postal Staff Union, which had 70,000 members. As a member of the Legislative Assembly, he argued forcefully for labor rights and played a key role in the passage of the Trade Union Act of 1926, which legally protected trade unions. While building his legal career, Jinnah also began rising as a political leader. Although the Indian National Congress had been founded in 1885, Muslims were initially hesitant to support it, fearing domination by the Hindu majority. Early Congress meetings included only a small number of Muslims, mostly from elite backgrounds. Jinnah entered political life more actively in 1904 by attending the 20th annual session of the Congress in Bombay. He aligned himself with the moderate faction, which believed in constitutional reform and Hindu-Muslim unity. He admired leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and Feroz Shah Mehta, and opposed the more aggressive approach of leaders such as Bal Gangadhar Tilak. In 1906, when the Simla delegation of Muslim leaders met the viceroy to demand safeguards for Muslims, Jinnah strongly criticized them, arguing they had no right to speak for Muslims without being elected. When many of those same leaders later formed the All India Muslim League in Dhaka, Jinnah again opposed the move, believing separate electorates would divide the nation. Ironically, he would later become the League's greatest leader. Despite opposing separate electorates, Jinnah used the system to enter formal politics in 1909 as Bombay's Muslim representative on the Imperial Legislative Council. Although non-official members like Jinnah could not vote, he made effective use of the platform. In 1911, he introduced the Waqf Validation Act to protect Muslim religious trusts. It later became the first bill proposed by a non-official member to be passed and approved by the viceroy. In 1912, Jinnah addressed the annual meeting of the Muslim League and formally joined it the following year, while still remaining a member of the Congress. He believed the struggle for Indian independence was the greater national cause. In 1913 and again in 1914, he traveled to Britain to represent Congress interests, but the outbreak of the First World War reduced British interest in Indian reforms. During one of these visits, Jinnah met Mohandas Gandhi for the first time. After returning to India in 1915, Jinnah found himself increasingly isolated as many moderate Congress leaders passed away. Still, he worked hard to bring the Congress and Muslim League together. His efforts resulted in the historic Lucknow Pact of 1916, which set agreed quotas for Muslim and Hindu representation. Because of this achievement, Sarojini Naidu famously called him the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. During the war years, Jinnah supported the British war effort, hoping India would be rewarded with self-government. He helped found the All India Home Rule League and demanded dominion status for India through constitutional means. British leaders noted his sharp intellect and disciplined approach. In 1918, Jinnah married Ratanbai Petit, known as Ruddy, despite strong opposition from her family and community. They had one daughter, Dina, born in 1919. After Ruddy's death in 1929, Jinnah's sister Fatima took care of him and his child. By 1919, relations between Indians and the British worsened. When emergency laws restricting civil liberties were extended, Jinnah resigned from the Imperial Legislative Council. The situation deteriorated further after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Gandhi's call for satyagraha gained massive support, but Jinnah strongly opposed it, calling it political anarchy. He believed freedom must come through law and constitutional struggle. At the 1920 Congress session in Nagpur, Jinnah was shouted down when he opposed Gandhi's approach. When Congress adopted satyagraha, Jinnah resigned from the party, leaving all political positions except his role in the Muslim League. This decision marked the end of one chapter in his life and the beginning of another. The alliance between Gandhi and the Caliphate faction did not last long. The resistance movement failed to produce the results many had hoped for, and British-controlled institutions in India continued to function. During this period, Jinnah began searching for new political ideas. He even considered forming a new party to challenge the Congress. In September 1923, Jinnah was elected as the Muslim member for Bombay in the newly created Central Legislative Assembly. Here, he proved himself to be a highly skilled parliamentarian. He worked closely with Indian members of the Swaraj Party and continued to demand full responsible government for India. His strong performance was noticed by the British authorities, and in 1925, Lord Reading offered him a knighthood. Jinnah declined politely, saying, "I prefer to be plain Mr. Jinnah." In 1927, the British government under Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin began an early review of Indian policy, as required by the Government of India Act of 1919. The resulting Simon Commission, led by John Simon, arrived in India in March 1928. Indian leaders, both Hindu and Muslim, boycotted the commission because no Indian representatives were included. Some Muslim leaders broke away from the Muslim League and welcomed the commission, but most of the League stood firmly behind Jinnah and confirmed him as its permanent president. Addressing the League, Jinnah declared that a constitutional war had been declared against Britain. He criticized the British government for appointing an all-white commission, calling it a sign that Indians were being judged unfit for self-government. In response to a British challenge to produce an Indian plan for constitutional reform, the Congress formed a committee led by Motilal Nehru. The Nehru Report proposed joint electorates based on geography. Jinnah, though he believed separate electorates were necessary to protect Muslim rights, was willing to compromise. However, talks failed. Jinnah then presented his own proposals, known as the 14 Points, which demanded guaranteed Muslim representation. These proposals were never adopted, as League meetings dissolved into bitter arguments. After the Labour Party came to power in Britain in 1929, Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald called for round-table conferences in London to discuss India's future. Jinnah attended the first two conferences, but was not invited to the third. From 1930 to 1934, Jinnah remained mostly in England, practicing law before the Privy Council and handling cases related to India. Historians differ on why Jinnah stayed in England for so long. Some believe he hoped for a judicial or parliamentary role, while others see this period as a pause for reflection. One biographer described these years as a time of order and contemplation, placed between his early struggle and his final political rise. In 1931, Fatima Jinnah joined her brother in England and remained his closest companion and supporter. As Jinnah's health declined, she provided constant care and advice. During this time, his daughter Dina was educated in England and India. When Dina chose to marry a Parsi man, Neville Wadia, Jinnah opposed the decision. Though he maintained polite correspondence with his daughter, their relationship remained strained, and she did not visit Pakistan during his lifetime. By the early 1930s, Muslim political consciousness was rising again, especially after the Pakistan Declaration in 1933. Muslim leaders urged Jinnah to return and revive the Muslim League, which had grown weak and inactive. Though he remained the League's president in name, he initially refused to return to India. Liaquat Ali Khan, who would later become Jinnah's closest political ally, met him and strongly encouraged his return. After consultations with Muslim leaders, Jinnah agreed. In early 1934, he returned to the subcontinent while still traveling between India and England for some years, eventually selling his London home and closing his British legal practice. In October 1934, Muslims of Bombay elected Jinnah to the Central Legislative Assembly while he was still in London. Soon after, the Government of India Act of 1935 granted greater powers to the provinces, but left real authority with the viceroy. From 1937 onward, Jinnah worked tirelessly to rebuild the Muslim League. He expanded membership, reduced fees, reorganized leadership, and strengthened the party's structure. By December 1939, the League had grown to nearly 3 million members, marking the end of Jinnah's political isolation and the beginning of his final rise. Until the late 1930s, most Muslims living under British rule believed that after independence they would live in a single united India. This belief was shared by many Hindus and other supporters of self-government. However, alongside this idea, new nationalist visions were slowly emerging. In 1930, during a Muslim League session at Allahabad, Sir Muhammad Iqbal proposed the idea of a separate Muslim state in British India. A few years later, in 1933, Chaudhry Rahmat Ali published a pamphlet introducing the name Pakistan for a Muslim homeland in the Indus Valley. During this period, Jinnah and Iqbal exchanged letters, and over time, Jinnah began to regard Iqbal as his mentor. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. While the Congress continued to push for a strong central government, many Muslim leaders, including Jinnah, feared that Muslims would be left unprotected in such a system. Although the Congress officially supported a secular India, some of its leaders promoted Hindu cultural dominance, which worried many Muslims. Even so, the Congress retained significant Muslim support until about 1937. The real divide deepened after the 1937 provincial elections. In the United Provinces, attempts to form a coalition government between the Congress and the Muslim League failed. Congress governments showed little sensitivity toward Muslim cultural and religious concerns. This strengthened the Muslim League's claim that it alone could protect Muslim interests. It was after this period that the demand for Pakistan gained serious momentum. Some historians suggest that after the 1937 elections, Jinnah turned toward the idea of partition out of desperation. Others argue that during this time, Jinnah rediscovered his Islamic identity and sense of history. From the late 1930s onward, he increasingly adopted Muslim dress and began to present himself as the sole spokesman for Muslims across India. Iqbal's influence on Jinnah became especially strong in these final years before Iqbal's death in 1938. Iqbal urged Muslims to unite under Jinnah's leadership and strengthen the Muslim League. Scholars widely agree that Iqbal played a decisive role in convincing Jinnah to lead the movement for a separate Muslim homeland. Jinnah himself came to accept Iqbal as his guide and mentor. After 1937, Jinnah's speeches began to reflect Islamic symbolism and historical references. While he continued to promise religious freedom and minority rights, his vision of Pakistan was increasingly shaped by Islamic ideals of justice, equality, and unity. He openly stated that if he ever had to choose between ruling a Muslim state or honoring Iqbal's ideas, he would choose Iqbal's vision. The outbreak of the Second World War in September 1939 changed the political situation dramatically. The British government declared India at war without consulting Indian leaders, leading to widespread protests. The Congress demanded immediate independence and later resigned from provincial governments. Jinnah, however, adopted a more cautious approach. While he did not support the British war effort outright, he also did not oppose it. This stance led the British to recognize the Muslim League as the true representative of Indian Muslims. As cooperation between the League and the British increased, the Viceroy asked Jinnah to clearly define the Muslim League's position on self-government. In February 1940, the League's Working Committee met to develop a constitutional proposal. Soon after, Jinnah informed the Viceroy that the League would demand partition rather than a federal system. This led to the historic Lahore Resolution, passed on January 23, 1940. The resolution embraced the two-nation theory and called for independent Muslim-majority regions in the northwest and east of India with full autonomy. It also demanded safeguards for Muslim minorities in other areas. Reactions to the Lahore Resolution were mixed. Gandhi described it as confusing, but accepted that Muslims had the right to self-determination. Congress leaders strongly criticized it, calling the idea unrealistic and extreme. Even so, the Congress retained significant Muslim support until about 1937. As new nationalist visions emerged, Jinnah and Iqbal exchanged letters, and over time, Jinnah began to regard Iqbal as his mentor. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches.
In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches. In later years, Jinnah openly acknowledged Iqbal's influence and often used his ideas, language, and imagery in his speeches.
In July 1945, the Labour Party came to power in Britain under Clement Attlee. The new government ordered a review of India's future. Elections were announced for both central and provincial assemblies. The Muslim League campaigned on one slogan, Pakistan. In the 1945-46 elections, the League won all Muslim seats in the Constituent Assembly and secured 75% of the Muslim vote in provincial elections. This victory confirmed Jinnah's claim as the sole representative of Muslims. In March 1946, the British sent the Cabinet Mission to India. It proposed a united India with autonomous provinces grouped by religion. Defense and foreign affairs would be handled by a central authority. Jinnah accepted the plan, but disagreements over power sharing caused it to collapse. The Congress joined the interim government first. The Muslim League joined later in October 1946. Violence erupted, especially in Calcutta. Talks continued but failed again during meetings in London in December 1946. By the end of 1946, Jinnah demanded a fully independent and sovereign Pakistan. He believed time would strengthen his position, especially in Bengal and Punjab. Meanwhile, the British decided to replace Wavell with Lord Mountbatten to speed up their exit from India. On 20 February 1947, British Prime Minister Clement Attlee announced that Lord Louis Mountbatten would become the new Viceroy of India. He also declared that Britain would transfer power to India no later than June 1948. Mountbatten took office on 24 March 1947, 2 days after arriving in India. By this time, the Congress had accepted the idea of partition. Nehru later said that Congress leaders were tired and saw partition as a way out. They believed that keeping Muslim-majority provinces loosely tied to India was not worth losing strong central power. However, the Congress insisted that if Pakistan was created, Punjab and Bengal must be divided. Mountbatten had been warned that Jinnah would be his most difficult challenge. Their meetings began on 5 April 1947 and continued for 6 days. At the first meeting, Jinnah jokingly said, while standing between Mountbatten and his wife Edwina, "A rose between two thorns." Despite this light moment, Mountbatten grew frustrated with Jinnah because of his firm and repeated demand for Pakistan. Jinnah feared that once the British left, power would be handed to a Congress-controlled assembly, which would weaken Muslim political rights. He demanded that the army be divided before independence. Mountbatten wanted a common defense system, but Jinnah insisted that a sovereign Pakistan must have its own armed forces. Mountbatten later informed the British government that if Pakistan was not accepted, the Muslim League might turn to violence. On 2 June 1947, Mountbatten presented the final plan to Indian leaders. Britain would transfer power on 15 August 1947 to 2 dominions, India and Pakistan. Provinces would vote whether to join India or Pakistan. Punjab and Bengal would also vote for partition, and a boundary commission would draw the borders. Plebiscites were planned in the northwest frontier province and the Sylhet district of Assam. On 3 June, Mountbatten, Nehru, Jinnah, and Sikh leader Baldev Singh announced the plan on radio. Jinnah ended his speech with the words, "Pakistan Zindabad." Some listeners misunderstood his words, but the message was clear. In the following weeks, Punjab and Bengal voted for partition. Sylhet and the Northwest Frontier Province voted to join Pakistan, as did Sindh and Baluchistan. On 4 July 1947, Liaquat Ali Khan asked Mountbatten to recommend Jinnah as Pakistan's first governor-general. Mountbatten was unhappy, as he had hoped to hold that role in both countries. Jinnah did not trust Mountbatten to be neutral and wanted the position himself. Even before borders were finalized, mass migrations and violence had begun. Jinnah sold his house in Bombay and bought one in Karachi. On 11 August, he flew from Delhi to Karachi with his sister. As the plane departed, he quietly said, "That's the end of that." On 11 August, Jinnah addressed Pakistan's Constituent Assembly in Karachi. He declared that all citizens were free to worship in their temples, mosques, or churches, and that religion had no role in state affairs. He emphasized equality and citizenship for all. On 14 August 1947, Pakistan became independent. Jinnah led the celebrations in Karachi. One observer described him as the single powerful authority of the new nation, calling him the Quaid-e-Azam, the great leader.